Hello, my name is Charlotte Rowe. This is my 7th year in 4-H, and I'm an intermediate member of the 4-H Club Hooked on Nature in Broward County, Florida. For my illustrated talk today, I'm going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and how to play. So you may be wondering, what is Dungeons and Dragons? Well, Dungeons and Dragons, or D&D as it is often called, is a fantasy roleplay game. D&D was created in 1974 by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, and was inspired by the book series Lord of the Rings. Well, now that you know what D&D is, you'll need to know how to play. It may seem complicated, but there are very few rules for D&D. This is because the story and situations are made based on the player's decisions. There are two main roles in D&D, the player and the dungeon master. The player runs a character they created and is put into a situation that the dungeon master creates. The dungeon master, or DM, creates the story and any monsters or non-player characters. In D&D, outcomes are mainly found by rolling dice. A 20-sided die is most commonly used to tell how well you do or accomplish something. Before you can start playing D&D, you will need to create a character. You do this by making a character sheet. On the right is a picture of a character sheet where you would put the name and statistics of your character. The basic stats that will modify how well you do something are strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, and charisma. You would find these 6 basic stats by rolling 4 6-sided dice and not using the lowest score. You will then add together the 3 remaining scores. The higher the score you get, the better. On the character sheet, you will also add information that makes your character unique, like flaws and a backstory. There are many different types of characters. To make your characters more individual, there are 2 main factors, race and class. The basic races are Dragonborn, Dwarf, Elf, Half-Elf, Halfling, Human, and Tiefling. The basic classes are Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard. These are the main races and classes, but if your DM allows you, you could create your own race or class. This is called homebrew. Each race and class is special because it gives you certain boosts to your statistics. Sadly, I couldn't go too in-depth into the different races and classes because there's a time limit for these illustrated talks, and I could probably spend the whole time just talking about this. So moving on to add-ons. If you are really into the game, then you can buy or make things like miniature figures of your characters and game boards. This will make the game more real or easier to follow because you can see where everything is in front of you. But buying and making minis can be very time consuming or expensive, so if you don't want to splurge, then you can always mark a coin and use that as your character. Here are some miniatures that I made out of clay for my family's D&D campaign. Despite D&D using mostly your imagination, there are a few things you will need. First being a dice set with at least one of the following: a 4-sided dice, a 6-sided dice, an 8-sided dice, a 10-sided dice, a 12-sided dice, and a 20-sided dice. You will also need a player's handbook. This is necessary for buying anything in the game or for spellcasting if you're a wizard. A pen and paper or a notebook will definitely come in handy as well. You will need this to keep track of any changes in your money or your character's stats. Now here's a quick example of how a scene may play out in D&D. Anything written in red is gameplay. Anything in black is the story itself. You're walking through the woods on the way home to your village. Roll a d20 for a perception check. You roll a 4, which fails. You are suddenly jumped by a group of 3 goblins. Roll a d20 for initiative. Initiative is the order of who attacks first. You get an 18. As the goblins jump out, you spin around and attack first using your sword. Roll a d20 to see if you hit. You roll a 15, which passes. Roll a d8 for damage. You get a 6. You swing your sword, instantly killing one of the goblins. This scares them and the rest run away. Dungeons & Dragons is an amazing game. If you had heard of it from before now, you may have thought of it as a nerdy game that people play in their basements to be antisocial. But D&D is a game that brings you closer to people. In Dungeons & Dragons, you can accomplish anything if the dice allow it. So go start a campaign with your friends. You won't regret it.